Is Jesus a copycat savior? I remember when I was leading a group of high schoolers to UC Berkeley. We were doing a missions trip, and we wanted to expose our high schoolers to thinkers who were atheists, who made claims against Christianity, even people who were maybe even anti-theists, people who didn't even think there was any value in theism. We wanted our young people to encounter these folks so they could hear their objections before they themselves were in college. So we're there the first year, and sure enough, the very first speaker we invited in said, "Class." And we invited him in to speak to our young people. He said, "I want to describe a savior for you, and then I want you to tell me who I'm describing." Okay, he was born of a virgin, born in a manger or a cave, tended by angels, had 12 disciples, worked miracles, died on a cross, rose from the grave 3 days later. His followers celebrated his resurrection with the Lord's Supper. They called him the Good Shepherd. All these descriptions that sounded just like Jesus. And of course, one of our students, who was not as prepared as the others, because she joined our team very late, she raised her hand and she said, "Jesus." And he said, "No, I'm describing Mithras." That's a Persian deity 400 years before Jesus, one of the many deities that early believers copied to create the fictional account known as Jesus of Nazareth. And I will tell you that shook that one young person I brought who raised her hand. And we had to help her because everybody else had been trained on this issue, but she had not received that training. And right away, she was shaken by that claim. This idea that Jesus is so similar to many other pre-Jesus mythologies, like Osiris or Horus or Attis or Adonis or Marduk or Mithras. And they will trot these similarities out to say, well, look, all these facts, this is too, what are the odds that all of these things would be true of both of these mythologies, they would say. Mithras is a mythology. You all agree with that, right? Well, yes. Well, then Jesus is too, because they are the exact same mythology. Really, I want to just help you with a few quick responses to those kinds of claims. Number one, if you do the examination yourself and really research, and I have researched all of them, they are not similar to Jesus. As a matter of fact, most of those claims, being born in a manger or born in a cave, being born of a virgin, most of these claims are just flat out false. They are not true at all. So for example, Mithras, we don't have a lot of good information about Mithraic religion because it's a mystery religion and there wasn't any written documentation. But we do know this about Mithras. His birth story is that he emerged from the side of a mountain, leaving a cave. Now, how you could twist that into being born of a virgin in a cave or a manger is beyond me. But what we do see is a second observation I want to share with you. So number one, make sure you investigate the claims. You'll find that 90% of them are not even true. But number two, think about this for a second. Why would you be surprised that people who are thinking about God in the years before God shows up would imagine some things about God that are true? So for example, in a lot of these mythologies, you will see that, yeah, that deity was born of some unnatural way of coming into the world. Not necessarily born of a virgin, but there'll be some miraculous explanation of how God enters the world. Well, why would that surprise you? I mean, humans who think about God think that he is different by his very nature. All of these mythologies, for example, the God will be able to do some miraculous event, some miracle at the hands of that God. Well, why would that surprise you? If there is a God, he would be able to do miraculous things, wouldn't he? That these gods maybe had disciples. Well, why would that surprise you? If there is a God who's all-knowing, he would probably want to impart his followers with some information. These are the things we would expect people to imagine, even if they're imagining incorrectly, which is probably why Paul on Mars Hill encounters a group that he says something akin to, hey, you know, you guys, you worship a lot of gods. As a matter of fact, I even saw a monument here, an idol here to an unknown God. I'm here to tell you that you got some of that stuff right, most of it wrong. I'm here to share with you the real God. Even Paul was aware that people had been imagining the nature of God for hundreds of years before he really showed up. One last thing, though. I think the idea that we might think about something, given our setting, and even imagine it with some level of clarity, to imagine it with some level of accuracy shouldn't surprise us. There is a book that was written by an author named Morgan Robertson. It was an interesting book, written many years, over 100 years ago. And in this book, he describes a huge ocean liner, passenger liner, that on its maiden voyage hits an iceberg as it's crossing from Europe toward America, and it sinks. And it's got not quite enough lifeboats. It's understaffed in terms of lifeboats, and like 2,000 plus people die in the sinking of this ship. Does that sound familiar to you? He even gives the boat a name. I'll tell you what the ocean liner was called. I'll spell it for you. Titan. That's it. Not Titanic. You thought it was Titanic, didn't you? No, it's the Titan. He wrote a book about a ship, a passenger ship, that is about the right length, right size, right number of passengers, right number of rescue boats, and it's sailing across the United States, sunk when it hit an iceberg, and he pretty much locates where it's going to happen. Yet he writes that book more than 12 years before the Titanic ever set sail. How was he able to guess with that kind of... I suspect if somebody came along 1,000 years from now and discovered this little book called The Futility, the Wreck of the Titan, if they would have found that book that described the Titan, they might deny the real Titanic sinking, right? Because, oh no, clearly that can't be true, because this guy, he guessed that was just copied from the Titan book that Morgan Robertson wrote. Do you see how people can think about an event? It turns out he was himself a bit of an engineer. He was interested in these kinds of ocean liners. He was watching the trajectory of the kind of building that we were doing on ships of this size. And he imagined, boy, if they were to sail in those kinds of waters at that kind of year, that'd be a tough path. And he correctly envisions what could happen based on his familiarity with the culture in which he lived. Why would we not think that there would be people who would correctly imagine and think about the nature of God before he arrives? And then Paul would come along and say, well, I'm going to tell you, you're close, but here's the real God. The real God that's different than any other prior mythology, because he was attested to by witnesses who saw this with their own eyes, including me, says Paul. I saw him on the road to Damascus. That's a very different claim than any other prior God. Jesus is not a copycat savior. He's the real savior that we have been dreaming about for thousands of years.